The case of Kevin Ray Underwood sent shockwaves through the small community of Purcell, Oklahoma, and beyond. On April 13, 2006, 10-year-old Jaimie Rose Boland went missing, sparking a frantic search effort. Just days later, the discovery of her body led to a harrowing revelation. Her neighbor, Kevin Ray Underwood, had not only killed the young girl, but harbored dark fantasies of cannibalism and depravity. This video delves into the chilling details of the case, the investigation that led to his capture, and the ultimate resolution of justice. Jaimie Rose Boland was a vibrant and energetic 10-year-old who lived with her father in the small town of Purcell, Oklahoma. She was known for her bright smile, a love of adventure, and an independent streak that made her stand out among her peers. A fourth grader at Purcell Intermediate School, Jaimie enjoyed riding her bicycle, spending time with her friends, and exploring the neighborhood, a quiet community where everyone knew each other. On April 13, 2006, Jaimie had spent the day like any other, attending school and chatting with her friends. However, as the afternoon turned into evening, she failed to return home. Her father, Curtis Boland, began to worry. Jaimie was not the type to stay out late without letting someone know where she was. As time passed and there was still no sign of her, his concern turned to panic. He began calling friends and neighbors, hoping someone had seen her, but no one had. It was as if Jaimie had vanished into thin air. Curtis wasted no time contacting the local police to report his daughter missing. Officers responded quickly, recognizing that in missing child cases, every minute counts. They began by canvassing the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen Jaimie or noticed anything unusual. Flyers with her picture were printed and distributed throughout the town. The entire community came together, fueled by the urgency to find Jaimie and bring her home safely. Word spread quickly through Purcell. Local news outlets reported on the missing child, and volunteers joined the search. They combed through parks, alleyways, and wooded areas, calling out Jaimie's name. Search dogs were brought in, and law enforcement began coordinating with state and federal agencies to widen the scope of their investigation. As the hours ticked by, the sense of dread grew heavier. The Bolands' quiet, close-knit neighborhood was now the center of a frantic search effort, and fear gripped everyone as they wondered what could have happened to Jaimie. The investigation began piecing together Jaimie's last known movements. Witnesses reported seeing her walking near her apartment complex after school. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was reviewed, and police questioned anyone who might have had contact with her. Despite their efforts, there was no immediate breakthrough. Each passing hour without news felt like an eternity for her family and the community. While the search continued, authorities turned their attention to the residents of the apartment complex where Jaimie lived. They went door to door, speaking to neighbors and asking for any information, no matter how minor it might seem. Among those questioned was Kevin Ray Underwood, a 26-year-old who lived in an apartment just steps away from Jaimie's home. Underwood was quiet, polite, and cooperative. He claimed he had not seen Jaimie that day and even expressed concern about her disappearance. Nothing in that initial interaction suggested he could be involved, and the investigation moved forward. As night fell, Curtis Boland made a public plea for his daughter's safe return. With tears in his eyes, he begged anyone who might have information to come forward. His heartbreak was palpable, and it struck a chord with everyone watching. The case quickly gained traction in the media, drawing attention from across the state. People prayed for Jaimie's safe return, but deep down, an unspoken fear lingered. What if it was already too late? The search continued through the night and into the next day. Investigators began looking into registered sex offenders in the area, reviewing their records and checking their alibis. They also started scrutinizing the backgrounds of other residents in the apartment complex, hoping to uncover a lead. As they dug deeper, unsettling patterns began to emerge, hinting that Jaimie's disappearance might not have been random. Amid the growing desperation, the police received a tip that would change the course of the investigation. A neighbor reported hearing strange noises coming from Underwood's apartment on the day Jaimie went missing. This was enough for investigators to take a closer look at the man who had seemed so unremarkable during their initial interview. They decided to revisit Underwood, this time with sharper focus and a more probing line of questioning. The disappearance of Jaimie Rose Boland had captivated an entire community and placed the town of Purcell under a dark cloud of uncertainty. Everyone wanted to believe that she would be found safe and sound, but as the investigation progressed, the reality of her fate would prove to be far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation into Jaimie Rose Boland's disappearance intensified, police began revisiting leads, re-interviewing neighbors, and piecing together timelines. Among those they spoke to again was Kevin Ray Underwood, the seemingly quiet and unassuming 26-year-old who lived in the same apartment complex as Jaimie. While he had initially cooperated, something about his demeanor during the follow-up questioning gave investigators pause. His answers seemed rehearsed, and there was a nervous energy about him that raised suspicion. Underwood's behavior prompted officers to dig deeper. They obtained a search warrant for his apartment. What they discovered inside would shock even the most seasoned investigators. As they entered the modest one-bedroom unit, the overwhelming smell of cleaning products greeted them, along with a meticulously tidy living space. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, but as they began to search, they found a chilling piece of evidence: a large plastic storage bin, carefully sealed and stashed away. When officers opened the bin, the reality of Jaimie's fate became heartbreakingly clear. Inside was her lifeless body, concealed and contorted in the confined space. She had been suffocated and struck on the head, with signs that Underwood had attempted to carry out deeply disturbing fantasies. The discovery was devastating, bringing a tragic end to the search for the missing 10-year-old. The officers immediately took Underwood into custody. As they interrogated him, he confessed to killing Jaimie, providing gruesome details about how he had lured her into his apartment under the pretense of showing her his pet rat. Once she was inside, he attacked her, fulfilling a dark and twisted plan that he had been harboring for months. Underwood admitted that his ultimate goal was to commit cannibalism, a shocking revelation that left even experienced investigators horrified. Further searches of Underwood's apartment uncovered items that painted a clearer picture of his disturbing mindset. They found a journal in which he had written about his fantasies of murder and cannibalism. There were also books and online materials related to these subjects, revealing an obsession that had spiraled out of control. Investigators discovered tools and materials he had purchased in preparation for the crime, indicating a level of premeditation that was both chilling and methodical. The news of Jaimie's death sent shockwaves through Purcell. The community, which had been united in hope during the search, was now plunged into grief and disbelief. How could someone who seemed so ordinary commit such an unthinkable act? Kevin Underwood had lived among them, quietly working at a grocery store and blending into the background. Yet behind closed doors, he harbored dark fantasies that ultimately led to the tragic loss of an innocent child. Jaimie's father, Curtis Boland, was overcome with grief when he learned of his daughter's fate. The community rallied around him, offering support and condolences, but no words could ease the pain of such a profound loss. Vigils were held in Jaimie's memory, with neighbors and strangers alike coming together to honor her life. Flowers, candles, and notes of sympathy were placed near the apartment complex, turning the site of her death into a temporary memorial. As the investigation continued, authorities worked to piece together a complete timeline of events. They sought to understand not only what had happened, but why. Underwood's confession provided horrifying clarity, but it also raised troubling questions about how someone could harbor such thoughts and act on them without detection. Mental health professionals were brought in to analyze his behavior and background, hoping to gain insights that might prevent future tragedies. The discovery of Jaimie's body and Underwood's arrest marked the beginning of a legal process that would expose the full extent of his depravity. For the community of Purcell, it was a moment of reckoning, forcing them to confront the darkness that had existed in their midst. While justice would eventually be served, the scars left by Jaimie's death would linger for years to come, a grim reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden dangers that can lurk behind even the most unassuming faces. Kevin Ray Underwood's actions stunned everyone who knew him. On the surface, he appeared to be an ordinary man, quiet, polite, and largely unremarkable. But as investigators delved deeper into his life, a disturbing portrait of a deeply troubled individual began to emerge. Underwood, 26 at the time of the murder, had lived in Purcell for much of his life. He was described by neighbors and co-workers as shy and introverted, someone who mostly kept to himself. However, beneath this outwardly benign demeanor lay a mind consumed by dark and twisted fantasies. Underwood had struggled with feelings of inadequacy and isolation for years. He lived alone in a small apartment, worked at a local grocery store, and had few close relationships. Though he occasionally socialized with coworkers and neighbors, he often felt like an outsider. This sense of alienation appeared to fuel his descent into a world of disturbing thoughts and online activities. In the months leading up to Jaimie Boland's murder, Underwood's behavior became increasingly erratic. He spent hours online, exploring forums and websites dedicated to topics that most would find deeply unsettling. He read extensively about serial killers, cannibalism, and acts of extreme violence, seemingly obsessed with the details of these horrifying acts. He frequented chat rooms where he discussed his fantasies, finding others who either shared his interests or were willing to indulge them in conversation. These online interactions served as an outlet for his dark desires, allowing him to articulate thoughts that he kept hidden from the outside world. Investigators discovered a journal in which Underwood had meticulously recorded his thoughts and fantasies. The entries painted a chilling picture of a man consumed by the idea of committing murder. He wrote about his desire to kill and consume another human being, detailing how he would carry out such an act. These writings revealed not only his violent intentions but also a calculated, methodical mindset. Underwood didn't view his fantasies as fleeting thoughts. He saw them as plans waiting to be executed. Underwood's co-workers and neighbors reported subtle warning signs in hindsight. He was known to make offhand comments that seemed strange or inappropriate, such as joking about morbid topics or expressing fascination with gruesome news stories. While these remarks raised eyebrows, no one suspected the true extent of his dark thoughts. Most people chalked up his odd behavior to social awkwardness or a dark sense of humor. What made Underwood's actions particularly chilling was the level of premeditation involved. He had been preparing for months, purchasing tools and materials he believed he would need to carry out his fantasies. Among the items found in his apartment were duct tape, knives, and cleaning supplies, tools he later admitted were meant for use in his crimes. He had also rehearsed scenarios in his mind, envisioning how he would lure a victim and dispose of the evidence. Mental health experts who analyzed the case speculated that Underwood suffered from severe psychological issues, including obsessive-compulsive tendencies and possibly a personality disorder. His isolation and lack of meaningful connections may have exacerbated his mental state, allowing his fantasies to grow unchecked. While Underwood was never formally diagnosed with a specific condition, it was clear that his mind operated in a way that was both deeply disturbed and alarmingly calculated. Despite his disturbing inner world, Underwood had managed to maintain a facade of normalcy. He went to work, paid his bills, and interacted with others just enough to avoid drawing suspicion. This duality, the ability to blend into society while harboring such dark intentions, made his crime all the more terrifying. It raised questions about how someone could live undetected for so long while planning and eventually committing such a heinous act. In his confession, Underwood admitted that he had long fantasized about killing someone, but it was not until he saw Jaimie Rose Boland that he decided to act on those fantasies. He described how he had observed her from afar, noting her small stature and trusting nature. He lured her into his apartment under the guise of showing her his pet rat, a ploy that preyed on her innocence and curiosity. Once she was inside, he attacked her, carrying out the act he had envisioned so many times. The stark contrast between Underwood's quiet, unassuming exterior and the monstrous reality of his inner thoughts shocked everyone who heard his story. It was a reminder that the most dangerous individuals are not always those who outwardly appear threatening. Underwood's ability to mask his intentions until the moment he acted made him all the more chilling, a predator hiding in plain sight. The revelations about Underwood's life and mindset sparked widespread discussions about mental health, social isolation, and the red flags that often precede violent acts. Many wondered whether his crime could have been prevented if someone had recognized the warning signs earlier. While Underwood's arrest ensured he would never harm another person, the tragedy of Jaimie's death left a lasting impact, highlighting the need for vigilance and support for individuals struggling with dark or harmful thoughts. Kevin Ray Underwood's arrest for the murder of Jaimie Rose Boland set the stage for a legal process that would reveal the full scope of his depravity and ultimately bring justice to a grieving family. The case garnered national attention, with the details of Jaimie's tragic death shocking people across the country. What followed was an emotionally charged trial that would delve into Underwood's motives, his mental state, and the chilling nature of his crime. Underwood was charged with first-degree murder and later faced additional charges related to his disturbing intentions toward Jaimie. As the trial date approached, the prosecution was determined to bring justice for Jaimie and ensure that Underwood was held accountable for his actions. Prosecutors faced the daunting task of presenting a case that not only demonstrated the severity of the crime, but also painted a clear picture of the premeditation and callousness that defined Underwood's behavior. The prosecution's case against Underwood was built on a foundation of irrefutable evidence, beginning with his confession. When questioned by authorities, Underwood had offered a detailed, graphic account of how he had lured Jaimie into his apartment and murdered her. He freely admitted to his actions, offering an explanation that was both horrifying and chilling in its coldness. His confession, along with the physical evidence found in his apartment, including Jaimie's body, items he had used to prepare for the crime, and his journals detailing his violent fantasies, served as the backbone of the prosecution's case. However, Underwood's defense team sought to mount a case that questioned his mental state at the time of the murder. They argued that he was suffering from severe psychological issues that rendered him incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. They pointed to his online activities, his obsessive thoughts, and his apparent inability to form healthy social relationships as evidence of his mental instability. His defense attorneys tried to convince the jury that Underwood's actions were the result of a deep psychological disorder that had clouded his judgment and driven him to commit the murder. One of the central debates in the trial revolved around the issue of criminal responsibility. The defense team called upon expert witnesses to testify that Underwood's obsession with murder and cannibalism, along with his long-standing psychological issues, indicated that he was not fully aware of the gravity of his crime at the time he committed it. These experts argued that he suffered from a personality disorder, which could have distorted his sense of reality and made it difficult for him to comprehend the full consequences of his actions. They described Underwood as someone who had long been isolated from society and who had created a fantasy world in which murder and violence were acceptable ways to cope with his deep-seated fears and frustrations. Despite these arguments, the prosecution pushed back, arguing that Underwood's actions demonstrated clear premeditation and intent. They pointed to the fact that he had carefully planned the murder for months, purchasing tools and materials he intended to use, writing detailed accounts of his fantasies, and even rehearsing how he would carry out the crime. His meticulous planning, they argued, showed a level of awareness and intent that could not be attributed to mere mental illness. Underwood had not acted impulsively or out of a momentary lapse in judgment. He had coldly and deliberately taken the life of a young girl to fulfill his gruesome fantasies. As the trial progressed, jurors were forced to confront the grisly details of the murder. The prosecution presented photographs of Jaimie's body, which had been discovered in a plastic bin in Underwood's apartment. The images were graphic and disturbing, yet they were crucial in illustrating the severity of the crime. The victim's family, including her father, Curtis Boland, sat through the proceedings, their grief palpable as they listened to the details of Jaimie's final moments. Curtis Boland, who had initially held out hope that his daughter might return home safely, was now forced to confront the brutal reality of what had happened to her. In response, Underwood's defense attempted to show that he had not intended to kill Jaimie but had instead acted out of some misguided compulsion. They argued that Underwood had become overwhelmed by his violent fantasies and that, in a moment of psychological breakdown, he had carried out the murder without fully understanding the consequences. They also pointed to his history of mental health issues, including his online obsession with dark topics, as evidence of his inability to think clearly at the time of the crime. However, this line of argument was met with skepticism by both the prosecution and the jury, who found it difficult to reconcile the cold, calculated nature of Underwood's actions with a defense based on diminished capacity. The jury deliberated for several days before reaching a verdict. They ultimately convicted Underwood of first-degree murder, rejecting the defense's arguments of mental incapacity. The verdict was a victory for Jaimie's family and the community, but it also left lingering questions about how Underwood could have committed such an atrocious crime. The conviction ensured that he would be held accountable for Jaimie's death, but it did little to ease the profound pain felt by those who loved her. In the sentencing phase, Underwood's defense team pleaded for leniency, citing his mental health struggles and arguing that he should receive a sentence that would allow for psychiatric treatment. However, the prosecution argued that Underwood's actions were too heinous to warrant such consideration. They emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime and the lasting trauma that Jaimie's death had caused to her family and the community. In the end, Underwood was sentenced to death, a decision that was met with mixed emotions. For some, it represented the closure they needed to begin healing, while for others, it underscored the tragic loss of an innocent life. The trial of Kevin Ray Underwood was a painful and sobering reminder of the capacity for evil that can lie beneath a seemingly ordinary exterior. It raised important questions about the intersection of mental illness and criminal responsibility, as well as the ways in which society can address the underlying factors that contribute to violent acts. For Jaimie's family and the people of Purcell, the trial was not only about bringing Underwood to justice, but also about finding a sense of closure and preventing such a tragedy from happening again. The outcome of the trial ensured that Underwood would never again be able to harm another person, but the memory of Jaimie Rose Boland, her life, her spirit, and the love she shared with those around her would endure long after the proceedings ended. The death of Jaimie Rose Boland left a deep, unhealing scar on the community of Purcell, Oklahoma, as well as on her family. The tragedy was not just the loss of a bright and innocent 10-year-old girl. It was a brutal wake-up call that reminded everyone of the hidden dangers that can lurk in the most unsuspecting places. For those closest to Jaimie, the pain of her murder was a weight they would carry for the rest of their lives. But as time passed, they also found ways to honor her memory, reflect on the lessons learned from the horrific events, and try to make sense of the senseless. In the wake of the trial and Underwood's conviction, the community of Purcell came together in various ways to process their grief and find healing. The shocking nature of the crime left residents feeling both vulnerable and disillusioned. Purcell, a town where people generally felt safe, had been rocked by the discovery that someone so close, a neighbor, a co-worker, could commit such an unthinkable act. The murder forced the community to question their assumptions about safety, trust, and the people they interacted with daily. They realized that evil could manifest itself in forms they had never imagined, hidden behind the facade of normality. For Jaimie's family, especially her father, Curtis Boland, the pain was immeasurable. Curtis had raised Jaimie on his own after a divorce, and their bond was incredibly close. Losing her in such a brutal manner devastated him, and he struggled in the years that followed to come to terms with the loss. The father, who had once been hopeful, organizing searches and pleading for the safe return of his daughter, now faced a grim reality. Even though Underwood was convicted and sentenced to death, no amount of justice could bring Jaimie back or repair the irreparable damage caused by her death. Curtis and the Boland family had to endure a painful public process as they relived Jaimie's death in the courtroom. Watching the trial unfold, with all the gory details and graphic evidence, was a harrowing experience. In some ways, it was a necessary step in the pursuit of justice, but it also left a lasting emotional toll on them. Yet despite the trauma, Curtis remained steadfast in his desire to seek justice for his daughter and to raise awareness about child safety in the aftermath of such a horrific crime. The Boland family, after the trial and sentencing, found solace in the support of friends, neighbors, and strangers. The outpouring of grief and sympathy from people both near and far reminded them that they were not alone in their sorrow. Many people in Purcell, deeply affected by Jaimie's death, vowed to make sure her story was not forgotten. Memorials were held in her honor, and efforts to promote child safety in the community became a priority. The Boland family worked with local law enforcement and child advocacy groups to implement new measures to help prevent such crimes in the future. On a broader scale, Jaimie's death sparked a discussion about the prevalence of mental health issues and their potential connection to violent behavior. The details of Underwood's life, his disturbing online activities, his lack of social connections, and his deep psychological issues raised questions about the role of mental health care and its effectiveness in identifying and intervening with individuals who may pose a danger to others. Experts pointed to the need for better mental health services, particularly for individuals who exhibit dangerous tendencies but do not have the support or resources to address their problems before they escalate. The case drew attention to the reality that sometimes the warning signs are missed or dismissed, leading to tragic consequences. Additionally, the case underscored the need for greater awareness of how easily harmful fantasies can be nurtured in the dark corners of the internet. Underwood's online activity, including participation in forums that glorified violence and cannibalism, demonstrated the growing influence that internet subcultures can have on vulnerable individuals. The internet has become a breeding ground for ideologies and behaviors that, while hidden from the public eye, can fuel the development of harmful and extreme thoughts. The Boland family and community members pushed for increased education on internet safety and urged parents to be more vigilant in monitoring their children's online activities. The case also raised difficult but important questions about the justice system and its ability to appropriately handle individuals with severe psychological issues. While Underwood was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death, there was a growing debate about whether the legal system adequately accounts for the complexities of mental illness. Some believe that the criminal justice system should place more emphasis on treatment for mentally ill offenders, particularly those who show signs of violent behavior before they act. Others felt that the nature of Underwood's crime was so heinous that the death penalty was the only justifiable punishment. Regardless of the legal arguments, the death of Jaimie had made it clear that the system, though imperfect, had to continuously adapt in its efforts to prevent such acts of violence. In time, as the years passed, the memory of Jaimie Rose Boland remained alive in the hearts of those who knew her and in the wider community of Purcell. While no amount of legislation, policy change, or public outcry could bring her back, efforts to make the world safer for children and families continued. Jaimie's family became active advocates for child safety, working with local organizations to promote awareness and education about how to recognize the signs of a potential predator and how to prevent future tragedies. They hoped that by sharing Jaimie's story, they could prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. At the same time, the case reminded the public that the most brutal crimes often do not come from the most obvious sources. It was a reminder that people, even those who appear harmless, may harbor dangerous intentions. It served as a sobering lesson about vigilance and the importance of trusting one's instincts. Neighbors, co-workers, and friends of Underwood had not seen the signs of his violent fantasies, but after the fact, many reflected on their past interactions with him and wondered if there had been clues they missed. For Jaimie's community, it was also a reminder that healing is not linear. While memorials and tributes were an essential part of coping, the pain of losing a child in such a horrific manner never fully dissipates. Curtis Boland, though committed to the cause of justice for his daughter, had moments where he felt the weight of the world pressing on him. Still, through the grief and pain, he remained determined to ensure that Jaimie's story was not forgotten. In the end, Jaimie Rose Boland's death, though tragic, became a catalyst for change. It sparked conversations about child safety, mental health, the influence of the internet, and the importance of being vigilant in protecting the vulnerable. It also served as a reminder that no community, no matter how small or seemingly safe, is immune from the potential for darkness. But in the face of such horror, the light of compassion, resilience, and remembrance could still shine through, honoring Jaimie's life and legacy long after the tragedy that took it.